There's a part of you that remembers something the world made you forget. A part that doesn't belong to this surface level, 9 to 5, scroll till you sleep life. You can feel it in those quiet moments when no one's watching. A strange pull in your chest, a memory you don't remember but feel. Like something ancient in you is calling out not with words, but with gravity. The sensation that you were meant for something more, not more attention, not more likes, but more depth. A deeper life, a truer path, something royal but not entitled in essence.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Carl Jung would call it the archetype of the king. Not a literal king, but a psychological one. An inner force that represents order, sovereignty, vision, and sacred responsibility. And here's the secret Jung whispered through symbols and dreams. Most of us have banished this king into the unconscious. We've buried him under years of trauma, people-pleasing, fear, guilt, and the desperate craving to fit in. We didn't kill the king, we just forgot him. But forgetting doesn't mean he's gone. It means he's watching, waiting, testing. And one day, if you're lucky or brave, you'll hear the call to awaken him. Not in some cliché motivational speech, but in the deepest corridors of your soul. And when that moment comes, you'll face a choice: continue living as a subject in your own kingdom, or rise and reclaim the throne you abandoned. But be warned, awakening the inner king is not about domination. It's not about ego or control. It's about alignment. The king archetype is the keeper of the realm, and your realm is your mind, your body, your time, your relationships, your vision. When the king is asleep, chaos reigns, distraction creeps in. Self-doubt becomes law. Addictions become rituals. You become ruled by shadows you don't even know exist. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's what happens when the king sleeps. You live a life that feels accidental. You react instead of rule. You chase instead of choose. And eventually, you forget what it feels like to walk with sovereignty, to speak with weight, to move with purpose, to look at your own reflection and see truth instead of confusion. So what does it mean to awaken the forgotten king? It means you must descend into the underworld of your own psyche. You must go where most people refuse to go, into the places that still scare you, the memories you buried, the masks you wear. The part of you that still seeks your father's approval, the part that still fears your own power, the part that sabotages your relationships because love feels too dangerous. The king doesn't awaken in a seminar. He awakens in solitude, in suffering, in silence. He awakens when you stop running from yourself, when you sit down in the ruins of your own internal war and say, "Show me who I am beneath all this noise." And when you say it with sincerity, not with ego, but with surrender, something ancient moves. You feel it. A shift. The first breath of a force you forgot was even yours. But here's the test: the king only awakens in those who are willing to die first. Not physically, psychologically. You must let go of the false identities you've clung to for safety. The people pleaser, the chameleon, the overachiever, the victim, the mask of the performer. All of them must burn. And in their ashes, something new is born, not new because it's invented, but new because it's remembered. Jung believed the king archetype is not just a metaphor. It's a living pattern in the psyche, a blueprint. And when you align with it, your life begins to reorder itself. You stop chasing validation and start radiating presence. You stop reacting emotionally and start responding with wisdom. You stop asking others for permission and start granting yourself authority. But the king is not alone. He is surrounded by other energies: the warrior, the magician, the lover. And if the king is unconscious, these other parts become distorted. The warrior becomes a bully. The magician becomes a manipulator. The lover becomes an addict. Without the king to balance the court, the inner kingdom turns against itself. You've seen it in others. You've felt it in yourself. So the question becomes, are you ready to take the throne? Because it's not glamorous. It's not comfortable. It's not about being served. It's about serving something greater. The king serves order, not control, harmony. He doesn't impose. He integrates. He listens to the chaos of the inner world and brings clarity. He doesn't run from discomfort. He sits in it until it reveals its lesson. And perhaps the most terrifying truth of all, the king does not wait to be chosen. He chooses himself. That's what most people will never do. They'll wait for validation, for a sign, for someone to tell them they're worthy. But you already are. The archetype is already inside you, encoded in your psyche like a sleeping dragon. And the only thing keeping it asleep is your fear of what will happen if you unleash it. Because once you awaken the king, you can no longer play small. You can no longer pretend you don't know. You can no longer betray your truth without feeling the pain of it. The king doesn't let you lie to yourself. He doesn't let you stay in environments that poison your soul. He doesn't let you waste your time on people who drain your fire. He demands integrity, and integrity is expensive. So let me ask you the question Jung would ask, but sharper. What part of you must die in order for the king to live? What belief? What behavior? What relationship? What version of yourself are you still protecting that keeps you from stepping into your own authority? Most people run from that question their entire life. They build empires of distraction to avoid it. Careers, addictions, personas. But deep down they know. They know they're not ruling. They're reacting. They're surviving. They're caught in the grip of unconscious forces, old wounds, inherited stories, unresolved fears, and they call it a personality. But a personality is not a prison. It's a pattern. And patterns can be broken, rewritten, reclaimed. That's what the king does. He doesn't just lead others, he leads the self. He brings the unconscious into the light, not to shame it, but to integrate it. He knows that the shadow is not the enemy, it's the part of us that holds the power we were too afraid to own. The king doesn't chase power, he embodies it. Power for him is not control over others, it's deep alignment with truth. Truth that cuts through illusion. Truth that burns away everything false. Truth that liberates you from the endless game of proving and performing. That is what you're awakening now. And once you taste it even for a moment, you can't go back. When the forgotten king begins to stir within you, the world starts to look different. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. The veil lifts. You see more clearly. You begin to notice where you've abdicated your throne in daily life, in the way you let people speak to you, in the way you silence your intuition, in the way you trade your values for convenience. And in that seeing, there is pain, but also power. Because Jung taught us that the path to wholeness always begins with confrontation. You cannot integrate what you refuse to meet. The King's awakening is not a spiritual high. It's a psychological reckoning. It forces you to walk into the parts of your past you swore you'd never revisit. The childhood wounds, the betrayals, the masks you inherited from parents or society. Jung called this the work of individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, not who the world trained you to be. And this process is not a retreat. It's a return to the center of your own being, a remembering of the throne you were born to sit upon. But the throne is not given. It is earned, not through external achievements, but through inner mastery. The king archetype cannot be faked. It cannot be mimicked. You can wear the clothes, speak the words, play the part, but the energy will betray you. People can feel when a man or woman is pretending to be stable while internally consumed by chaos. You can't fake sovereignty. It must be forged, and forging begins with fire. Life will test you. It will send you loss, humiliation, rejection, isolation, not to break you, but to expose what in you is breakable. And whatever breaks, whatever cannot hold under pressure, was never the king, it was the persona, the shell. The king is what remains when everything else falls away. The king is the part in you that doesn't flinch when everything you once leaned on disappears. He stands, not because it's easy, but because there's nothing else left to do but rise. You've probably already met this part of yourself, even if only briefly. Maybe it showed up when someone you loved needed your strength and you didn't collapse. Maybe it came through when you hit rock bottom and chose to rebuild yourself from the ruins. Maybe it whispered in your ear when you were about to betray your values and instead chose truth. That was the king. Not dramatic, not loud, but immovable. Jung said that the king is not only the ruler, but the axis around which the psyche finds balance. He is the one who holds the opposites, the light and the shadow, the rage and the compassion, the discipline and the tenderness. He doesn't exile any part of himself. He brings all of them to the table, and then he rules them. That's what most people miss. They think ruling is about external control. But the king's first duty is always internal. He must become the center, the anchor, the still point in the storm. This is why most people never reach this stage. It's easier to stay split, to keep the nice guy separate from the inner rage, to keep the spiritual self separate from the sexual self, to keep the performer separate from the wounded child. But the king doesn't divide. He integrates. He knows that until you bring all parts of yourself into the light, you will live at war with your own soul. So ask yourself, what parts of you are still in exile? What emotions have you judged unworthy? What desires have you labeled as dangerous? What dreams have you abandoned because they didn't fit the image of who you thought you should be? The king doesn't ask you to abandon your ambition. He asks you to purify it, to make sure your dreams are rooted in truth, not in compensation for unhealed wounds. Most people chase success not because they want to lead, but because they want to feel enough. But the king doesn't chase. He creates. He doesn't build to prove, he builds to serve. He builds because his inner world is already full, and now it must overflow. And when that happens, something mysterious begins to occur. The world starts to reflect his internal order. People respond differently. Doors open, synchronicities appear. Not because of magic, but because of alignment. When you are in alignment, you do not need to manipulate. You do not need to convince. You do not need to beg. You become clear, and clarity is magnetic. Clarity is rare. Clarity is dangerous to those who thrive in chaos. That's why those who awaken the king within often find themselves losing friends, losing approval, losing their previous identity. And that's okay, because what you lose in comfort, you gain in command. But command does not mean control. The king doesn't micromanage. He doesn't cling. He delegates. He trusts. He creates space for others to rise. A true king inspires other kings. He doesn't need to be the smartest in the room, he needs to be the most rooted. And in that rooting, people feel safe. They feel seen. They feel challenged to become more. That's the power you hold. Not the power to dominate, but the power to activate. And to walk into a space and elevate the standard not by force, but by presence. And to walk into a relationship and raise the level of truth, not by demand, but by embodiment. To walk into your own mind and bring order to the chaos not by suppression, but by integration. But none of this happens until you make a vow. A vow to no longer betray yourself. A vow to listen when your intuition speaks, even if it costs you approval. A vow to protect your energy, your time, and your truth like sacred territory. Because that's what it is. Your inner kingdom is sacred. And every time you let someone in who doesn't honor it, every time you say yes when your soul says no, every time you pretend to be less than what you are committing treason against your own throne. This is not about being perfect. The king is not flawless. He is fallible. But he's honest. He knows when he's out of alignment. And he corrects course. That's the key, not perfection correction. You don't awaken the king once and stay there forever. You awaken him every day, in every choice. In every moment you choose truth over comfort, presence over reaction, vision over distraction. So ask yourself again, what does your throne look like? What kind of world would you build if you ruled your life with wisdom instead of fear? What kind of relationships would you attract if you stopped shrinking for love? What kind of legacy would you leave if you stopped waiting for permission and started creating from sovereignty? This isn't about fantasy. This is about urgency. Because your kingdom, the one inside you, is currently being ruled by something. If not the king, then who? The wounded child? The people pleaser? The shadow tyrant? The addict? The ghost of your father? Someone is ruling. And if you don't choose who, you'll live under laws you didn't write. The throne is waiting. The crown is heavy, but it fits. And once you place it on your head, not in arrogance, but in remembrance, everything begins to change. When we finally decide to sit on the throne of our own psyche, we begin to see why we abandoned it in the first place. Power is not light. It's not soft. True power, real internal sovereignty demands weight. It demands responsibility. Jung knew this. That's why he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he also warned that becoming whole means encountering everything you've hidden, everything you've disowned, and everything the world told you to suppress. To awaken the forgotten king in you is not to become someone else, it's to remember who you were before the world taught you to forget. We live in a culture of distraction, a world that rewards performance over presence, a society that teaches you how to succeed before it teaches you how to be real. And the result, men and women who look confident on the outside but are fractured on the inside. People chasing thrones in the world when they haven't claimed the throne within. This is why the king archetype matters now more than ever. Because the world does not need more performers. It needs anchors. It needs those who have ruled themselves before they try to influence anyone else. But here's the hidden truth. The king is not about being the center of attention. He's about being the center of gravity. He doesn't need to be the loudest voice in the room because his presence speaks before he does. And that presence only comes when you've done the one thing most people fear: face yourself. All of yourself. The parts you hide. The parts you deny. The parts you protect with sarcasm, with overcompensating, with silence. The king doesn't exile those parts. He invites them to the table. He listens. He learns. And then he leads. This is what Jung meant by integration. Not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. You don't destroy your shadow. You reclaim it. You don't suppress your rage. You give it a role. You don't deny your fear. You ask it what it's trying to teach you. The king does not fear conflict. He welcomes the tension because he knows that every inner battle, every emotional storm, every uncomfortable truth is an opportunity to expand his rule not over others, but over himself. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you truly trusted your own authority without outsourcing it to someone else? Most of us were taught to seek permission from parents, from school, from religion, and from social media, from experts. But the king doesn't seek permission, he embodies it. He doesn't need to be told who he is. He remembers who he is, and then he acts accordingly. That kind of remembering is dangerous because it threatens the systems that profit from your doubt. It challenges the relationships built on your compliance. It disrupts the identities that depend on your silence. But this is what must happen. To awaken the king is to disrupt, to shake the foundation of every structure in your life that was built on insecurity, fear, or false belonging. And yes, there will be loss. You'll lose people. You'll lose comfort. You'll lose the illusion of who you thought you had to be. But in that loss, you gain something far more valuable. You gain clarity. You gain alignment. You gain a life where you are no longer divided against yourself. And when that happens, something miraculous unfolds. The world begins to reflect your internal order. You'll notice that you attract different kinds of people. Not because you're trying to, but because your frequency has changed. You'll notice that drama leaves your life not because you avoided it, but because your energy no longer feeds it. You'll notice that opportunities appear not because you chased them, but because you became the kind of person who is ready for them. This is the power of the inner king. Not to manipulate reality, but to magnetize alignment. And once you've felt it, You'll never want to go back to who you were. But the king's journey doesn't stop with personal sovereignty. That's just the beginning. Once you've claimed the throne within, the next step is to serve the realm. That means creating order not just in your mind, but in your relationships, your work, your mission. It means becoming a force of stability in a world addicted to chaos. It means confronting injustice not with rage, but with presence. It means becoming the kind of man or woman whose life is a sanctuary for others, not because you're soft, but because you are anchored. And this is where your legacy begins. Not in what you achieve, not in how much money you make or followers you gain. Your legacy begins in the impact of your presence, in how people feel when you enter a room, in what shifts when you speak, in what you stand for when it's not easy, in what you protect when no one's watching. The king does not live for applause. He lives for alignment with truth. Carl Jung knew that every person carries within them an entire kingdom. But most leave it unclaimed. They die as peasants in a palace of potential. Why? Because the journey back to the throne is hard. It costs everything that isn't real. But if you're still listening right now, that means you're not like most people. You're still here because something inside you knows. You remember the crown. You remember the throne. You remember the silence of your own soul calling you back. So now the question is no longer, should I awaken the king? The question is, what am I still afraid of losing if I do? And what if losing it is the very thing that sets me free? This is your moment, not to perform, not to pretend, but to choose truth over comfort, in purpose over performance, depth over distraction, sovereignty over survival. Awaken the king, not someday, now.